Thanks so much for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Charlene Aaron. Election Day is just 1 week away, and some are saying the midterms are a referendum on President Obama and his policies. Democrats risk losing the Senate, but several races are still close. Dale Hurd has the story.
Polls show control of the U.S. Senate is coming down to the proverbial wire, with Democrats and Republicans locked in tight races in key contests in Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Arkansas, and North Carolina. In Iowa, Republican Jody Ernst has a 3-point lead over Democrat Bruce Braley with ads like this one.
I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm, so when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork. Washington's full of big spenders. Let's make them squeal.
Polls show nearly 7 out of 10 Americans are angry at the direction the country is headed, and more than half disapprove of the president's job performance. In the Senate, Republicans need a net gain of only 6 seats.
Well, I think we will hold the Senate. You know, I know all the pundits are saying Republicans will take the Senate. Democrats are going to prove the pundits wrong on Election Day when we keep the Senate.
This is going to be a good year for Republicans. It's a good environment for us. Luke talked earlier about the incompetence that some people feel about the Obama administration. I mean, that's catching up to them.
Some candidates are touting their military service, while others want voters to know they can handle a gun. It's going to come down to who shows up on Election Day and who stays home. Evangelicals, millennials, blacks, Hispanics. Polls may make projections, but the only poll that counts is on Election Day. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And joining us now for some analysis is CBN senior editor John Waggy. John, Dale mentioned 5 very close races, but you're looking at even more races. What does this mean for Election Day next week?
Well, it means that we could be up late watching all the returns. You know, there are as many as a dozen races here that could affect the Senate outcome. And when you look at the map, they're all over the country, and really the Republicans have a lot of ways to get the 6 seats they need to take the Senate. And so you count the 5 that Dale mentioned plus 6 or 7 others and 3 that the GOP has to hold on to, and it's going to come down. It could be close. It could be close on election night. But as I said, the Republicans have a lot of ways to get to the 6 seats and take over the Senate.
Wow. Well, we know that turnout is key. We've been bombarded with ads in recent weeks, for months actually. This is a non-presidential year. How motivated are people to vote, you think, now? Well,
and that's going to be the key, especially for Democrats, because as President Obama famously said, I'm not on the ballot this year, but my policies are. Now, that can be a two-edged sword. It could get people to the polls, Democrats who are saying we want to be loyal to the president, or it could just keep them away from the polls when they say, he's not on the ballot, I have no reason to show up, and I'm not very happy with a lot of things that are going on in the world, whether it's Ebola or ISIS or, you name it, taxes and Obamacare are another 2. And so that turnout is a factor. Then on the Republican side, you've got this kind of a tension between moderates and conservatives that are keeping some conservatives saying, I'm not going to go vote for this guy in North Carolina because he upset me, or I'm not going to vote for the guy in Mississippi because they played dirty tricks. And so you've got that on the conservative side to be watching too in the Republican Party. But the math favors the Republicans clearly in this election.
All right, the 7-day countdown is on. What do you think will be the deciding factor in the battle for the Senate as we head into these final days?
I think it's absolutely going to be turnout. I think that, if the Democrats use their micro-targeting system that they have, then they can keep some of these races close and maybe even keep the Republicans from taking the Senate. But Republicans have the sentiment, the anti-Obama feeling, the feeling that the country's on the wrong track, and that is their ace in the hole going into Tuesday.
Wow. Now, some say runoffs will keep us up in the dark until the new year. What do you think?
Well, and this is true. There are 2 states, Georgia and also in Louisiana, where there are runoffs if a candidate doesn't get 50% plus 1. So that means that we could be in December for Louisiana and January for Georgia, and the U.S. Senate could hinge in the balance. So.
Oh my, the election that may never end.
And then 2016 will start.
I know. Thank you so much, John. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Ephraim.
Changes could be on the way for abortion laws in North Dakota. That's because of the Life Begins at Conception Amendment. The measure would make North Dakota the first state to amend a state constitution and require the inalienable right to life at any stage of development. Those who oppose the measure say it's vaguely worded and could cause confusion. Supporters disagree. Jane Murdahl, who heads North Dakota's Choose Life, says the intent is to protect laws that are on the books already. The opposition is blatantly lying and trying to put fear in people's minds. The measure will be voted on November 4th.
The nurse who was quarantined by force in New Jersey after treating Ebola patients in West Africa is free this morning. Casey Hickox called her forced isolation in a hospital tent inhumane. She's now considering suing the state of New Jersey. Maine officials want Hickox to remain in her house until 21 days after the last possible exposure to the virus. Her attorney says states should follow federal health guidelines, which only require monitoring. 9 states now require a 21-day quarantine for healthcare workers returning from the Ebola hot zone.
Last week's attacks in Canada have now raised fears about lone wolf Islamic terrorism in the West. Here in America, a growing number of citizens are leaving to join ISIS. As Eric Stackelbeck reports, these ISIS recruits are being radicalized here in the U.S., and they may eventually return home to launch new attacks here.
It's hard to imagine America's heartland as a breeding ground for terrorism. Yet when news emerged that 2 U.S. citizens had been killed in Syria fighting alongside ISIS, the path led back to, of all places, Minnesota. The 2 men were part of a growing number of young Muslims from Minneapolis and St. Paul who have answered the call of jihad. At least a dozen young Muslims from here in the Twin Cities have left their homes to travel to the Middle East and join ISIS. Some of them worshipped at this mosque in a quiet suburb of Minneapolis. An Egyptian-American man allegedly recruited young Somali Muslims from the Al Farouk Mosque and helped send them to Syria. Mosque officials say they banned Amir Mashal earlier this year when they learned he was preaching jihad. The suspected terror recruiter remains at large.
Usually there's one principal person that is what I call the guide of the person that can take this person in this ideological state and guide them to Syria or wherever it might be.
Bob Fletcher is the former sheriff for Ramsey County, which includes the city of St. Paul. He now works with Somali leaders to battle radicalism in their Twin Cities community, which has seen dozens of young men travel overseas to join terrorist groups in recent years.
They need to procure travel documents. They need to raise money, usually somewhere in the area of $4,000 to $5,000 to help facilitate all the travel that takes place. And plus, they want to have money when they get there. And they need to make sure that someone is purchasing the tickets. That requires a credit card of some source to get to, and they need a driver and a facilitator to get them to the airport.
The recent deadly attacks against Canadian soldiers and the Canadian Parliament by ISIS sympathizers were another reminder of the chaos that just a handful of terrorists can cause on Western soil. It's estimated that as many as 3,000 Western passport holders from places like Canada, Britain, France, and the United States are fighting for the Islamic State. FBI Director James Comey and Attorney General Eric Holder both said recently that 12 Americans are fighting with ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Other Obama administration officials have said that at least 100 U.S. citizens overall have traveled to Syria to join terrorist groups. According to Democrat Congressman Tim Bishop, up to 40 of those American jihadists have already come home.
Those 40 are under FBI attention and surveillance, so they are known and they are being tracked by the FBI.
One suspected American the FBI is tracking starred in this recent ISIS propaganda video called Flames of War, where he executed Syrian troops.
We're here in the 17th Division military base just outside the city of Al-Raqqa, and we're here with the soldiers of Bashar. You can see them now digging their own graves in the very place where they were stationed.
A major concern is that ISIS recruits will return to the United States and carry out attacks here. Fletcher says ISIS sympathizers on U.S. soil who have never traveled overseas but were self-radicalized at home may be the more immediate threat.
I think it's a far greater concern that people that are here and radicalized that haven't gone back might strike out against America.
Eric Stackelbeck, CBN News, Minneapolis.
New reports dozens more girls and young women kidnapped by Boko Haram terrorists in Nigeria. This is the second round of kidnappings in less than 2 weeks. A little more than a week ago, terrorists took 60 women from the Borno State area, most of them Christians. The kidnappings are raising doubts about an announced ceasefire and hopes for the release of 219 schoolgirls held captive since April. A human rights report quotes escapees saying they're forced to become Muslim, forced into marriage, and raped.
Israel will move forward with its plans to build in East Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made that pledge in an address to Parliament Monday, and it comes despite pressure from the U.S. and other Western allies not to expand construction. Israel is building about 1,000 housing units in the city, and Netanyahu said there is consensus in Israel to continue just as every Israeli government has done since capturing East Jerusalem back in 1967.
Coming up, they are on the front lines in the fight against ISIS. So why does the rest of the Middle East hate them? Stephen Mansfield has the answer. There are people without a country, and now the Kurds are facing a vicious assault from the terrorists of ISIS. Is the United States doing enough to help them? Gary Lane has a look at the crisis facing the Kurds and the history of these remarkable people.
The ancient people known as the Kurds are scattered throughout the Middle East. They've suffered extreme persecution over the centuries, including a poison gas attack launched against them by Saddam Hussein in March 1988. 12,000 Kurds died an agonizing death. They now control this region in northeastern Syria, and Iraqi Kurdistan has welcomed Christians fleeing ISIS atrocities. Kurds long for a country they can call their own.
This is a dream of every Kurdish citizens. Every ethnic and every nationality have a right to have their own independent states.
A referendum on independence could soon be voted on by Iraqi Kurds, but Iran and Turkey oppose the creation of a Kurdish country. The Kurdish Workers' Party has fought Turkey for the past 30 years. Turkey views the Kurds as a greater threat than the Islamic State jihadists. Instead of fighting ISIS, the Turkish Air Force recently bombed Kurdish fighters near the border.
The Turks are acting with the slogan, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." So ISIS is now, in that case, a friend of Turkey.
And that further complicates U.S. efforts to stop ISIS. In the book, The Miracle of the Kurds, best-selling author Stephen Mansfield explains why the Kurds need Western support and how a Kurdish nation could serve as a model for the future of the Middle East.
And again, Stephen Mansfield has just written the new book, The Miracle of the Kurds, a remarkable story of hope reborn in northern Iraq. And Gary Lane spoke with him about the Kurdish people and why he wrote the book.
Oh, most Americans don't even know Kurds.
No, they don't.
What can you tell us about
In fact, I've had some funny moments where I've said, I'm going to talk about Kurds, and somebody will say, you mean the breakfast food? Yeah, I'm really delighted that the Kurds have come to the forefront of our news cycle and of our times. Because they're pretty amazing people. They consider themselves descendants of the ancient meat, so we're actually reading about their ancestors in our Bibles. They were denied nationhood after World War I, and now after Saddam's atrocities against them, finally the West began to pay attention. And look at the timing. Now they're on the forefront against ISIS, one of the most vicious enemy civilizations known.
Why don't people like them? What's the problem?
Well, people do now, but throughout their history, they really have been horribly treated. You know, they were, after World War I, they were promised their own nation. President Wilson's 14 points promising autonomy for local people groups. It was denied through some treaties that were agreed to secretly in Europe. Then they were mistreated by the Iraqi monarchy and then by Saddam, of course. And so they say, we have no friends but the mountains. We are a people without friends. I think that's changing, and I'm glad for my Kurdish friends that that's the case.
They have Syrian Kurds, they have Iraqis, Yazidis, Christians as well,
yes,
flooding into Kurdistan. They're welcoming them. How are they being treated, especially the Christians there?
Well, when the Christians were fleeing other Middle Eastern countries over the last years in this Christian flight that we're hearing about, many of them fled to Kurdistan. In fact, the Kurdish regional president, Masoud Barzani, actually received an award from the Pope. So many of these refugees have fled into Kurdistan because it's the best governed, most peaceful, most fair place. And this brings us to an important point, and that is that the Kurds are very unusual in terms of the Middle East. They are pro-West, they are pro-democracy, they are largely pro-Israel. Israel.
Their Islam's different?
Their Islam is far more moderate. They have a Christian department in their government. They have an Yazidi department in their government. Women sit on their Supreme Court. Women command troops in the Peshmerga, their word for their army. This is a moderate version of Islam, exactly what the United States should want to encourage.
Things turning a little bit here. What more needs to be done to stop ISIS near the border there?
Well, we've got to arm the Kurds directly, and that's something that the administration has been very hesitant to do. U.S. foreign policy has been based on the idea that we wanted a unified Iraq, so we wouldn't deal with the Kurds directly.
Not going to happen, is it?
It's just not going to happen. Baghdad is relatively corrupt, as we know, and the military pretty much abandoned the field when they came up against ISIS. But the Kurds stood solid, and now the administration has decided to provision the Kurds and to arm the Kurds, and we're seeing a dramatic change. We're also seeing a dramatic change in Turkish policy towards the Kurds. So things are going in the right way just at the beginning, and it's only because I think the U.S. has shown some strength.
And some of the Kurds are coming to faith in Christ. Tell me a little bit about that, and how can we as Christians in America pray for them?
Well, we need to pray for them because they have been abused by their own Muslim brothers. Saddam wrapped himself in Islam to oppose and to destroy the Kurds, to commit his atrocities against them. There have been many, many valiant missionaries and ministers over there, and many Kurds are coming to Christ. And it's because that now there's a free marketplace of ideas, a free marketplace of religion. They're hearing who Jesus is. They're seeing that Christians have been some of the people most caring about them and most supportive of them. And so as a result, we're seeing a great harvest there.
Okay, very good. It's an excellent read. I've read it myself. The Miracle of the Kurds. Thank you, Stephen Mansfield, for being with us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Up next, more than 10 million Hispanics live in the Lone Star State, and their vote is a hot commodity. The fight to win the Latino vote is next. For years, Texas has been a solid state for Republicans, but what did that change and it became a swing state that the Democrats could win? Analysts say that could happen.
Well, the key is the Latino vote. That's why conservatives are working hard to win Latinos to keep the Lone Star State in the Republican column. Heather Sells brings us that story from Dallas.
Armed with caffeine, young conservatives, and a mission to win Latinos, the Libre Initiative hopes to score big this year and down the road. Part of the strategy, phone surveys that identify top issues and encourage voting. Daniel Garza, who worked for George W. Bush, helped to start the group.
We launched the Libre Initiative because we felt that the left, progressive organizations who believed in collectivism and socialism light in America, were dominating the conversation within the Latino communities across the country.
More than 10 million Hispanics live here in Texas, and they're the fastest growing population group. It's one reason why both parties are waging a fierce battle for their vote.
You have to engage with the Latino electorate, and if you don't, you do so at your peril.
That effort is taking place in 8 states, with Texas a clear priority. It's a daunting task because the left has been putting money and top talent into the Lone Star State for some time via Battleground Texas. The thinking, Texas now has 38 electoral votes, and if the GOP loses here, so does any hope for taking the White House.
They understand that if Texas becomes a liberal state, that is it. We live in a liberal country for the foreseeable future. Conservatives need to wake up to this and to understand that Texas is a battleground.
Gonzalez and a growing number of conservatives are making a case for not only why it's important to reach Hispanics, but how.
I think conservatives need to extend to Hispanics an inclusive message of opportunity of the American dream and say the American dream can also be yours. Progressive liberal policies have put you in a hole, have conditioned far too many immigrants to see the government as benevolent.
Believe it or not, immigration reform is not the top issue for Hispanics. A Pew Research Center poll this year found that it's education and jobs. Another reason why the Libre Initiative believes its message of economic freedom is a winner.
At the end of the day, Latinos have not rejected market principles, conservative ideas, biblical values. It's just that the left has dominated the conversation for so long that when the right doesn't engage, they win.
At a recent community meeting, Libre volunteer Eddie Vasquez led worship in this Dallas church before speakers talked about police relations, parenting, and civic engagement. Afterwards, organizers gathered names and numbers and then encouraged people to vote. Political experts know turnout is a huge obstacle with Latinos. In 2012, just 1/3 of eligible Hispanic voters in Texas went to the polls, compared to 60% of whites. Both parties say youth is one reason, along with cultural background. In Houston, Dave Welch with the U.S. Pastor Council trains Hispanic pastors to help their congregations understand the process.
They come from countries where they have no voice, they have no vote, the government's the enemy, so they come here and they have no basis in understanding what self-government really means.
Back in Dallas, Jose Galvez gets it. A former candidate for local office, he urges Latinos to take the next step, getting involved in politics and government.
You're here. You migrated to the United States for a purpose, to better yourself, to better your family. So if you're not planning on going back to your home country and you're here, make it count.
For both parties, the Latino electorate represents a potentially huge prize, but only if this exploding population decides to make its voice heard. Reporting in Dallas, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Finally today, we've been telling you about the story of Brittany Maynard. She's the 29-year-old who has been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and says she'll take a pill to end her life on November 1st.
Now, we ask that you send your kind thoughts and prayers for Brittany on our Facebook page. We wanted to share a couple of them with you. Judy Olson said, "My God is an amazing God. He loves you so much. I'll be praying that God will reveal himself to you in a wonderful way." Another comment came from Sherry Olds, and she said, "If at the last moment you change your mind, just know it's okay too. Prayers for you, sweetie. Giving God control is hard for everyone somewhere in their life." Now, for more on this story and our exclusive interview with Johnny Erickson Tata about Brittany's story, simply log on to cbnnews.com.
We're certainly praying for Brittany.
Indeed we are.
Amen.
Indeed we are.
Well, that's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a terrific Tuesday, everybody.